I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. According to Wikipedia, the USS Constitution, also known as Old Ironsides, is a three-masted, wooden-hulled, heavy frigate of the United States Navy. She is the world's oldest commissioned naval warship still afloat. She was launched in 1797, one of 6 original frigates authorized for construction by the Naval Act of 1794, and the third constructed. The name Constitution was among 10 names submitted to President George Washington by Secretary of War Timothy Pickering in March of 1795 for the frigates that were to be constructed. Joshua Humphreys designed the frigates to be the young Navy's capital ships, and so Constitution and her sister ships were larger and more heavily armed and built than standard frigates of the period. She was built at Edmund Hart's shipyard in the north end of Boston, Massachusetts. Her first duties were to provide protection for American merchant shipping during the quasi-war with France and to defeat the Barbary pirates in the First Barbary War. Constitution is most noted for her actions during the War of 1812 against the United Kingdom, when she captured numerous merchant ships and defeated 5 British warships: HMS Guerrera, Java, Pictou, Cyane, and Levant. The battle with Guerrera earned her her nickname Old Ironsides and public adoration that has repeatedly saved her from scrapping. She continued to serve as flagship in the Mediterranean and African squadrons, and she circled the world in the 1840s. During the American Civil War, she served as a training ship for the United States Naval Academy. She carried American artwork and industrial displays to the Paris Exposition of 1878. Constitution was retired from active service in 1881 and served as a receiving ship until being designated a museum ship in 1907. In 1934, she completed a 3-year, 90-port tour of the nation. She sailed under her own power for her 200th birthday in 1997, and again in August 2012, to commemorate the 200th anniversary of her victory over Guerrera. Constitution's stated mission today is to promote understanding of the Navy's role in war and peace throughout educational outreach, historical demonstration, and active participation in public events as part of the Naval History and Heritage Command. As she is a fully commissioned Navy ship, her crew of 75 officers and sailors participate in ceremonies, educational programs, and special events while keeping her open to visitors year-round and providing free tours. The officers and crew are all active-duty Navy personnel, and the assignment is considered to be special duty. She is usually berthed at Pier 1 of the former Charlestown Navy Yard at one end of Boston's Freedom Trail. In the Quasi-War, President John Adams ordered all Navy ships to sea in late May 1798 to patrol for armed French ships and to free any American ship captured by them. Constitution was still not ready to sail and eventually had to borrow 16 18-pound cannons from Castle Island before finally being ready. She put to sea on the evening of the 22nd of July, 1798, with orders to patrol the eastern seaboard between New Hampshire and New York. She was patrolling between Chesapeake Bay and Savannah, Georgia, a month later when Nicholson found his first opportunity for capturing a prize. They intercepted Niger off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina on the 8th of September. A 24-gun ship sailing with a French crew en route from Jamaica to Philadelphia, claiming to have been under the orders of Great Britain. Nicholson had the crewmen imprisoned, perhaps not understanding his orders correctly. He placed a prize crew aboard Niger and brought her into Norfolk, Virginia. Constitution sailed south again a week later to escort a merchant convoy, but her bowsprit was severely damaged in a gale, and she returned to Boston for repairs. In the meantime, Secretary of the Navy Benjamin Stoddert determined that Niger had been operating under the orders of Great Britain as claimed, and the ship and her crew were released to continue their voyage. The American government paid a restitution of $11,000, equivalent of $193,519 in 2022, to Great Britain. Constitution departed Boston on the 29th of December. Nicholson reported to Commodore John Barry, who was flying his flag in the United States near the island of Dominica for patrols in the West Indies. On the 15th of January, 1799, Constitution intercepted the English merchantman Spencer, which had been taken prize by the French frigate La Insurgente a few days prior. Technically, Spencer was a French ship operated by a French prize crew, but Nicholson released the ship and her crew the next morning, perhaps hesitant after the affair with Niger. Upon joining Barry's command, Constitution almost immediately had to put in for repairs to her rigging due to the storm damage, and it was not until the 1st of March that anything of note occurred. On this date, she encountered HMS Santa Margarita, whose captain was an acquaintance of Nicholson's. The two agreed to a sailing duel, which the English captain was confident he would win. But after 11 hours of sailing, Santa Margarita lowered her sails and admitted defeat, paying off the bet with a cask of wine to Nicholson. Resuming her patrols, Constitution managed to recapture the American sloop Neutrality on the 27th of March, and a few days later, the French ship Carteret. Secretary Stoddert had other plans, however, and recalled Constitution to Boston. She arrived there on the 14th of May, and Nicholson was relieved of command. Captain Silas Talbot was recalled to duty to command Constitution and serve as Commodore of Operations in the West Indies. After repairs and resupply were completed, Constitution departed Boston on the 23rd of July with a destination of Saint-Domingue via Norfolk and a mission to interrupt French shipping. She took the prize Amelia from a French prize crew on the 15th of September, and Talbot sent the ship back to New York City with an American prize crew. Constitution arrived at Saint-Domingue on 15th of October and rendezvoused with Boston, General Greene, and Norfolk. No further incidents occurred over the next 6 months as French depredations in the area had declined. Constitution busied herself with routine patrols, and Talbot made diplomatic visits. It was not until April 1800 when Talbot investigated an increase in ship traffic near Puerto Plata, Santo Domingo, and discovered that the French privateer Sandwich had been taken refuge there. On the 8th of May, the squadron captured the sloop Sally, and Talbot hatched a plan to capture Sandwich by utilizing the familiarity of Sally to allow the Americans access to the harbor. First Lieutenant Isaac Hall led 90 sailors and Marines into Puerto Plata without challenge on the 11th of May, capturing Sandwich and spiking the guns of the nearby Spanish fort. However, it was later determined that Sandwich had been captured from a neutral port. She was returned to the French with apologies, and no prize money was awarded to the squadron. Routine patrols again occupied Constitution for the next 2 months, until the 13th of July, when the mainmast trouble of a few months before reoccurred. She put into Cap Francais for repairs. With the terms of enlistment soon to expire for the sailors aboard her, she made preparations to return to the United States and was relieved of duty by Constellation on the 23rd of July. Constitution escorted 12 merchantmen to Philadelphia on her return voyage, and on 24th of August put in at Boston, where she received new masts, sails, and rigging. Even though peace was imminent between the United States and France, Constitution again sailed for the West Indies on the 17th of December as squadron flagship, rendezvousing with Congress, Adams, Augusta, Richmond, and Trumbull. Although no longer allowed to pursue French shipping, the squadron was assigned to protect American shipping and continued in that capacity until April 1801, when Harold arrived with orders for the squadron to return to the United States. Constitution returned to Boston, where she lingered. She was finally scheduled for an overhaul in October, but it was later canceled. She was placed in ordinary on the 2nd of July, 1802. In the First Barbary War, the United States paid tribute to the Barbary States during the Quasi-War to ensure that American merchant ships were not harassed and seized. In 1801, Yusuf Karamanli of Tripoli was dissatisfied with the United States was paying him less than they had paid Algiers, and he demanded an immediate payment of $250,000, equivalent to $4,397,000 in 2022. In response, Thomas Jefferson sent a squadron of frigates to protect American merchant ships in the Mediterranean and to pursue peace with the Barbary States. The first squadron, under the command of Richard Dale, President, was instructed to escort merchant ships through the Mediterranean and to negotiate with the leaders of the Barbary States. A second squadron was assembled under the command of Richard Valentine Morris in Chesapeake. The performance of Morris's squadron was so poor, however, that he was recalled and subsequently dismissed from the Navy in 1803. Captain Edward Preble recommissioned Constitution on the 13th of May, 1803 as his flagship and made preparations to command a new squadron for a third blockade attempt. The copper sheathing on her hull needed to be replaced, and Paul Revere supplied the copper sheets necessary for the job. She departed Boston on the 14th of August, and she encountered an unknown ship in the darkness on the 6th of September near the Rock of Gibraltar. Constitution went to general quarters, then ran alongside the unknown ship. Preble hailed her, only to receive a hail in return. He identified his ship as the United States frigate Constitution, but received an evasive answer from the other ship. Preble replied, "I am not going to hail you for," quote, I am now going to hail you for the last time. If a proper answer is not returned, I will fire a shot into you," end quote. The stranger returned, quote, "If you give me a shot, I'll give you a broadside," end quote. Preble demanded that the other ship identify herself, and the stranger replied, quote, "This is His Britannic Majesty's ship Donegal, 84 guns, Sir Richard Strachan, an English Commodore," end quote. He then commanded Preble, quote, "Send your boat on board," end quote. Preble was now devoid of all patience and exclaimed, quote, "This is the United States ship Constitution, 44 guns, Edward Preble, an American Commodore, who will be damned before he sends his boat on board of any vessel," end quote. And then to his gun crews, quote, "Blow your matches, boys," end quote. Before the incident escalated further, however, a boat arrived from the other ship, and a British lieutenant relayed his captain's apologies. The ship was in fact not Donegal, but instead HMS Maidstone, a 32-gun frigate. Constitution had come alongside her so quietly that Maidstone had delayed answering with the proper hail while she readied her guns. This act began the strong allegiance between Preble and the officers under his command, known as Preble's Boys, as he had shown that he was willing to defy a presumed ship of the line. Constitution arrived at Gibraltar on the 12th of September, where Preble waited for the other ships of the squadron. His first order of business was to arrange a treaty with Sultan Slimane of Morocco, who was holding American ships hostage to ensure the return of 2 vessels that the Americans had captured. Constitution and Nautilus departed Gibraltar on the 3rd of October and arrived in Tangier on the 4th. Adams and New York arrived the next day. With 4 American warships in his harbor, the Sultan was glad to arrange the transfer of the ships between the 2 nations, and Preble departed with his squadron on the 14th of October, heading back to Gibraltar. The next battle is the Battle of Tripoli Harbor. Philadelphia ran aground off Tripoli on the 31st of October under the command of William Bainbridge while pursuing a Tripoline vessel. The crew was taken prisoner. Philadelphia was refloated by the Tripolines and brought into their harbor. To deprive the Tripolines of their prize, Preble planned to destroy Philadelphia using the captured ship Mystico, which was renamed Intrepid. Intrepid entered Tripoli harbor on the 16th of February 1804 under the command of Stephen Decatur, disguised as a merchant ship. Decatur's crew quickly overpowered the Tripoline crew and set Philadelphia ablaze. Preble withdrew the squadron to Syracuse, Sicily, and began planning for a summer attack on Tripoli. He procured a number of smaller gunboats that could move in closer to Tripoli than was feasible for Constitution given her deep draft. Constitution, Argus, Enterprise, Scourge, Siren, the 6 gunboats, and 2 bomb ketches arrived the morning of the 3rd of August and immediately began operations. 22 Tripoline gunboats met them in the harbor. Constitution and her squadron severely damaged or destroyed the Tripoline gunboats in a series of attacks over the coming month, taking their crews prisoner. Constitution primarily provided gunfire support, bombarding the shore batteries of Tripoli, yet Karamanli remained firm in his demand for ransom and tribute despite his losses. Preble outfitted Intrepid as a floating volcano with 100 short tons of gunpowder aboard in a final attempt of the season. She was to sail into Tripoli harbor and blow up in the midst of the Corsair fleet, close under the walls of the city. Intrepid made her way into the harbor on the evening of the 3rd of September under the command of Richard Somers, but she exploded prematurely, killing Somers and his entire crew of 13 volunteers. Constellation and President arrived at Tripoli on the 9th with Samuel Barron in command. Preble was forced to relinquish his command of the squadron to Barron, who was senior in rank. Constitution was ordered to Malta on the 11th for repairs and while en route captured 2 Greek vessels attempting to deliver wheat into Tripoli. On the 12th, a collision with President severely damaged Constitution's bow, stern, and figurehead of Hercules. The collision was attributed to an act of God in the form of a sudden change in wind direction. The Peace Treaty. Captain John Rogers assumed command of Constitution on the 9th of November, 1804, while she underwent repairs and resupply in Malta. She resumed the blockade of Tripoli on the 5th of April, 1805, capturing a Tripoline xebec, along with 2 prizes that the xebec had captured. Meanwhile, Commodore Barron gave William Eaton naval support to bombard Dern, while a detachment of U.S. Marines under the command of Presley O'Bannon was assembled to attack the city by land. They captured it on the 27th of April. A peace treaty with Tripoli was signed aboard Constitution on the 3rd of June, in which she embarked the crew members of Philadelphia and returned them to Syracuse. She was then dispatched to Tunis and arrived there on the 30th of July. 17 additional American warships had gathered in its harbor by the 1st of August. Congress, Constellation, Enterprise, Essex, Franklin, Hornet, John Adams, Nautilus, Siren, and 8 gunboats. Negotiations went on for several days until a short-term blockade of the harbor finally produced a peace treaty on the 14th of August. Rogers remained in command of the squadron, sending warships back to the United States when they were no longer needed. Eventually, all that remained were Constitution, Enterprise, and Hornet. They performed routine patrols and observed the French and Royal Navy operations of the Napoleonic Wars. Rogers turned over the command of the squadron and Constitution to Captain Hugh G. Campbell on the 29th of May, 1806. James Barron sailed Chesapeake out of Norfolk on the 15th of May, 1807 to replace Constitution as the flagship of the Mediterranean Squadron, but he encountered HMS Leopard, resulting in the Chesapeake-Leopard affair, and delaying the relief of Constitution. Constitution continued patrols unaware of the delay. She arrived in late June at Leghorn, where she took aboard the disassembled Tripoli Monument for transport back to the United States. Campbell learned the fate of the Chesapeake when he arrived in Malaga, and he immediately began preparing Constitution and Hornet for possible war against Britain. The crew became mutinous upon learning of the delay of their relief and refused to sail any further unless the destination was the United States. Campbell and his officers threatened to fire a cannon loaded with grape shot at the crewmen if they did not comply, thereby putting an end to the conflict. Campbell and the squadron were ordered home on the 18th of August and set sail for Boston on the 8th of September, arriving there on the 14th of October. Constitution had been gone for more than 4 years. In the War of 1812, Constitution was recommissioned in December with Captain John Rogers, again taking command to oversee a major refitting. She was overhauled at a cost of just under $100,000. However, Rogers inexplicably failed to clean her copper sheathing, leading him to later declare her a slow sailor. She spent most of the following 2 years on training runs and ordinary duty. Isaac Hall took command in June 1810, and he immediately recognized that she needed her bottom cleaned. Quote, 10 wagon loads, end quote, of barnacles and seaweed were removed. Hall departed for France on the 5th of August, 1811, transporting the new ambassador, Joel Barlow, and his family. They arrived on the 1st of September. Hall remained near France and the Netherlands throughout the winter months, continually holding sail and gun drills to keep the crew ready for possible hostilities with the British. Tensions were high between the United States and Britain after the events of the Little Belt Affair that previous May, and Constitution was shadowed by British frigates while awaiting dispatches from Barlow to carry back to the United States. They arrived home on the 18th of February, 1812. War was declared on the 18th of June, and Hull put to sea on the 12th of July, attempting to join the 5 ships of a squadron under the command of Rogers in President. He sighted 5 ships off Egg Harbor, New Jersey, on the 17th of July, and at first believed them to be Rogers' squadron. By the following morning, the lookouts determined that they were a British squadron out of Halifax. HMS Ailess, Africa, Belvidera, Guerrera, and Shannon. They had sighted Constitution and were giving chase. Constitution was becalmed and unable to run from the 5 British ships, but Hull acted on a suggestion from his first lieutenant, Charles Morris. He ordered the crew to put boats over the side to tow the ship out of range, using kedge anchors to draw the ship forward and wetting the sails to take advantage of every breath of wind. The British ships soon imitated the tactic of kedging and remained in pursuit. The result, 57-hour chase in the July heat, forced the crew of Constitution to employ myriad attacks to outrun the squadron, finally pumping overboard 2,300 U.S. gallons of drinking water. Cannon fire was exchanged several times, though the British attempts fell short or overshot their mark, including an attempted broadside from Belvidera. On the 19th of July, Constitution pulled far enough ahead of the British that they abandoned the pursuit. Constitution arrived in Boston on the 27th of July and remained there just long enough to replenish her supplies. Hull sailed without orders on the 2nd of August to avoid being blockaded in port, heading on a northeast route towards the British shipping lanes near Halifax and the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Constitution captured 3 British merchantmen, which Hull burned rather than risk taking them back to an American port. On the 16th of August, he learned of a British frigate, 100 NMI, to the south and sailed in pursuit. A frigate was sighted on the 19th of August and subsequently determined to be the HMS Guerrera, with the words, quote, "Not the Little Belt," end quote, painted on her foretopsail. Guerrera opened fire upon the entering range of Constitution, doing little damage. After a few exchanges of cannon fire between the ships, Captain Hull maneuvered Constitution to an advantageous position within 25 yards of Guerrera. He then ordered a full double-loaded broadside of grape and round shot, which took out Guerrera's mizzenmast. Guerrera's maneuverability decreased with her mizzenmast dragging in the water, and she collided with Constitution, entangling her bowsprit in Constitution's mizzen rigging. This left only Guerrera's bow guns capable of effective fire. Hull's cabin caught fire from the shots, but it was quickly extinguished. With the ships locked together, both captains ordered boarding parties into action, but the sea was heavy and neither party was able to board the opposing ship. At one point, the 2 ships rotated together counterclockwise, with Constitution continuing to fire broadsides. When the 2 ships pulled apart, the force of the bowsprit's extraction sent shock waves through Guerrera's rigging. Her foremast collapsed, and that's what brought the mainmast down shortly after. Guerrera was now a dismasted, unmanageable hulk with close to a third of her crew wounded or killed, while Constitution remained largely intact. The British surrendered. Hull had surprised the British with his heavier broadsides and his ship's sailing ability. Adding to their astonishment, many of the British shots had rebounded harmlessly off Constitution's hull. An American sailor reportedly exclaimed, quote, "Huzzah! Her sides are made of iron," end quote, and the Constitution acquired the nickname, quote, "Old Ironsides," end quote. The battle left Guerrera so badly damaged that she was not worth towing to port, and Hull ordered her to be burned the next morning, after transferring the British prisoners onto Constitution. Constitution arrived back in Boston on the 30th of August, where Hull and his crew found that news of their victory had spread fast, and they were hailed as heroes.
But now, yeah, make all the demons quiet, yeah, we were built to thrive, yeah, I think that we've all had enough. What keeps you up at night, yeah, make all the demons quiet, yeah, we were built to thrive, yeah, I think that we've all had enough, yeah, I think that we've all had enough. Sick of dealing with the old plan, they know that we're calling it wrong. You got me like, oh yeah, I think that we've all had enough.
Generation fueled by creation. We live lives on a small screen nation. We control the airwaves, no negotiation. I refuse to think we need saving. Something good will come from creation. And when we think that the world is too anxious, we'll adapt, evolve, survive, and save it.
What keeps you up at night, yeah, make all the demons quiet, yeah, we were built to thrive, yeah, I think that we've all had enough. What keeps you up at night, yeah, make all the demons quiet, yeah, we were built to thrive, yeah.